everybody, Deathblade here with another Chinese fantasy novel FAQ, and this is actually a re-recording. It's actually a re-recording of a re-recording. So the original video, the audio was bad, which was my fault, and then I re-recorded it just a couple minutes ago. Hey everyone, Deathblade here with another Chinese fantasy novel FAQ, and this is actually a re-record. I did this video before, but thanks to my mistake, I screwed up the audio and it was too bad. So Madam Deathblade. So this is actually third try. As I say, third try is the charm, and it's actually going to be way better than the original because in the first version I was just rambling and jabbering, and so this version is going to be a lot more focused, a lot more tight. Let's get started. I'm talking about philosophy in Xianxia novels. If you don't know what Xianxia novels are, check out this video, which I did a long time ago talking about it. Basically, they are the high fantasy Chinese cultivation novels in which the characters pursue path of becoming an immortal, or usually it goes much beyond that into being essentially like a god. What I want to talk about today is the philosophy of these novels. Now, I don't claim to be a philosopher, I don't claim to be an intellectual, I'm not going to be getting into some super deep stuff, but I do want to raise some questions, and in fact in this video I would really like to see comments from you guys, the readers. I want to hear what you think about a few of these different questions that I'm bringing up. Mostly these novels are designed for young readers, primarily young men, at least the kind that I translate, but there are also cultivation novels that appeal to female readers as well, and they're mostly for fun. But that said, I think these novels can do things that a lot of Western fantasy and Western science fiction cannot and does not do in terms of the situations that arise and the questions that arise in terms of the philosophy. So let's get into it. I'm going to talk about basically three different things that I think are important philosophical aspects of Xianxia and things that are worth thinking about. Now the first one is kind of obvious, and that's the Tao. So the cultivation novels, a lot of them have a big influence from Taoism. In my experience, it usually is superficial. The authors will sometimes quote from real Taoist texts, and they'll mention it a lot, but it is not as though the characters are practicing Taoists in the actual sense of the word. That said, one of the themes of these novels is the pursuit of the Tao, or I think a lot of times it's questionable whether it should be translated as the Tao, and maybe something more along the lines of the path or the way would make more sense, because each individual character is sometimes said to be pursuing their own, let's just call it a path, pursuing their own path, or sometimes searching for that path. And I think that's an interesting theme. I think that one of the things I've noticed is that many times those characters are said to not really understand what their path or Tao is or should be, and so they have to go out and find it. I think that's one of the coolest aspects of these novels, and something that I see people bringing up a lot as to why they like it or like them. That is the characters pursuing their path, finding out what it is. That's a very interesting aspect of the novels. What do you readers think in terms of the Tao or the path as portrayed in the novels and as portrayed by the characters who are searching for that path or who find it? I think that's the most obvious philosophical element and the easiest to sort of discuss. Next, I want to talk about how the Xianxia genre or the cultivation genre is kind of like speculative in terms of the reality that we live in. I'm a big fan of reading. I've always been. I like science fiction and fantasy. A lot of science fiction from years past speculates what the future is going to be like. Sometimes it's spot on, sometimes it's not. One thing that jumps to mind is there's a popular tabletop role-playing game called Cyberpunk 2020, and the game is supposed to take place in the year 2020, and it's this super futuristic cybertronic punk world. Obviously not the world that we live in, so they kind of missed the mark on that one. That said, I was talking with some friends just the other day about the SpaceX launch, and I was mentioning how I thought it was really interesting that the cockpit essentially has touchscreen controls. That made me think of years ago when I was watching Star Trek The Next Generation. On the bridge in Star Trek Next Generation, all of the controls are touchscreen, and I totally remember watching that back in the day and thinking, perhaps even commenting to friends and family, that it was unrealistic, that there would never be touchscreen controls in an actual spacecraft because it would be too hard to actually control it. And yet here we are in the year 2020. The spaceship that just got launched has touchscreen controls, so there you go. There's one that science fiction totally nailed. Now again, Xianxia cultivation novels are not science fiction. They are not intending to predict what the future is going to be like, but a lot of the universes that they represent operate under the assumption that Earth or an Earth-like planet is part of the larger universe. One thing that jumps to mind is my current project, Sage Monarch. In the legends of the current timeline that the novel takes place in, there is a mechanical or a technological civilization that existed in the past. It was populated by mortal people who did not practice immortal cultivation. They did not become immortals, but their technology became so advanced that they could challenge the immortals and they could even challenge the gods. They built mechas, they built spaceships that were so incredibly powerful that somebody, a mortal like any of us today, could power them and unleash the same power as the gods, and eventually the gods of this universe destroyed them because they were becoming too powerful. Does that sound familiar? If you're a religious person, it might. So it begs the question of whether the universes that we see in Xianxia novels are actually reminiscent of real life universes. Now I know, don't laugh at me, I'm not saying that Xianxia is real, but it does make you wonder, is it possible that the spiritual aspect as portrayed in these novels could be something akin to reality? What if the mortal people of our world could push technology to the point of having the same kind of powers that the immortals and the gods of these novels have? It doesn't seem completely beyond the realm of possibility. So what do you think? As readers of these novels, what have you seen portrayed? In what ways do you think it could reflect our future or the universe that we live in? Or is it just completely made up and completely fiction? In your opinion, what do you think? I'd love to hear your comments below. The final point I want to get into is about the morality of the cultivation worlds presented in these novels. Now, I did a video already talking about the brutality or the ruthlessness of the cultivation world, and that's kind of what I'm talking about here. In these universes, in these worlds that we read about in the novels, usually the resources required to become immortal, to become a god, are very limited. People have to fight for them. They become ruthless in the way that they do that. And also, the cultivation world is almost always described as being a place where there is survival of the fittest. There is the law of the jungle. The strong eat or take advantage of or destroy the weak, and might makes right. So that's a question that I think is explored rather extensively in Xianxia novels. So whether the authors intend this or not, there is a huge body of work in which we have a window into a world in which might does make right, and the people that are the most powerful can make the rules and do what they want. So we get to see people who are corrupt, but they're super powerful and they can do whatever they want. They can pick on people, they can make people do what they want. We do have some people who might be kind-hearted or at least good, or at least not as bad as everybody else, who eventually rise up to power. Almost without a doubt, whether people are good or bad, they will kill other people to take the resources and to make themselves stronger. They have to do that. If they don't, they will die or they will be killed. Now, of course, the real life world that we live in does feature a situation in which the powerful, or maybe you could say the rich, or maybe you could say whatever word you want to use, they do get to do what they want, and they sometimes do exist above the law, or whatever you want to say about that. It definitely does not get pushed to the level we see in the cultivation novels. In the cultivation novels, the people who are truly strong can actually physically do whatever they want, and people cannot kill them. So in the world that we live in, yes, we do have nuclear weapons, but there is not one person who has the power of nuclear weapons built into their body that could be unleashed with precision force or to a grand scale, and then because of that, they can do whatever they want, and anybody who opposes them, they can kill or imprison or whatever they want. So definitely the Xianxia power levels push things to a level that is beyond reality, and also something that isn't always portrayed in the fantasy novels that come from English-speaking countries. So I'm curious what you readers think about that. When you read these novels in these worlds in which might makes right, and there's a law of the jungle, survival of the fittest, what do you think about that? Do you think that it is portrayed realistically? When you see the characters put into these worlds and you see the way they react, how do you feel about that? Do you think that they are realistic? Do you think it's unrealistic? Do you approve? Do you disapprove? Beyond the sense of just pure entertainment and enjoyment, when you really think about it, are the authors portraying the characters reacting in a realistic way and the world developing in a realistic way according to the way it would if people really could enforce their own will on other people by strength alone? So that's another question that I think is worth pondering. And this last one is probably the one in which Xianxia excels the most, because I think one of the best ways for fiction to explore philosophical elements is you put characters into situations, you see how they react, you see how they explain themselves, you see how they try to argue their point with other people who disagree with them, and you see them by their actions explain their own belief system. So that's it for this video. If you like this kind of content, please do like, please do subscribe, please comment. You can also check the links in the description for ways to support the channel directly, and I'll see you in the next video. Godspeed.